Chapter 20. Someone old, something new. Saint-Domingue, 1786. Sunday dawned beautifully. Birds sang in chorus, and sunlight flooded the island, as if nature itself were celebrating Rose's wedding day. Sunday was the one day enslaved people could claim as their own. Although Luc, Julia, and Rose were free, many friends and guests remained bound to their plantations. Fortunately, the Maubiers had granted permits for them to attend, given that the ceremony was held at the church after the morning masses concluded. The church was bathed in warm, multicolored lights that streamed in through the stained glass windows. Father Sabalis stood at the wooden altar alongside Luc, who wore a simple black frock coat. He looked very handsome and wonderfully excited to have finally reached this joyous day. Everything was perfect. Organists were generally reserved for white weddings, but Manon was a gifted singer. As Rose promenaded from the back of the church, Manon's voice melodically filled the dome and archways. Julia had gifted Rose a stunning dress. The cream fabric was simple, but it was elegantly adorned with delicate beads crafted from the shells that had been washed ashore by the sea. As Marie Cosette watched her daughter walk down the aisle, the only thing that truly mattered was the look on Rose's face. There was a reason that Rose took nearly 5 years to be ready for this day. Slavery had harmed her so deeply that she could not imagine a life of happiness. But today she looked genuinely at peace, as if all the troubles of the past were gone. They were about to exchange their vows when the church doors burst open. Every head turned. Through the doors walked a face that Marie Cosette had never expected to see again. Madame de Rouvray. She hadn't seen that witch of a woman since Jérémie, but now there she stood, at the back of the church in Cap Français, interrupting her daughter's wedding. Madame de Rouvray swept in, flanked by 2 noble women, exuding an arrogance that suggested even God himself should cater to her whims. "Father, I must speak with you," she said in feigned distress. Father Sabalis shot an embarrassed look at Marie Cosette before making his way up the center aisle. He bowed politely to the marquise. Everyone in the church, including the bride and groom, followed suit. "Madame," the priest said, his voice tense but respectful, "we are in the midst of the sacrament of matrimony." The marquise's eyes scanned the room until they landed on Marie Cosette. A malicious smile curled her lips. She turned back to the priest. "Father, we require confession." She clutched her chest as though haunted by some unseen affliction. Father Sabalis tried to respond. "Of course, madame, it is only that you would not begrudge a contrite heart a moment with God." Her imperious demeanor allowed no opposition. Sabalis looked apologetically at Marie Cosette and then nodded, gesturing to the confessional. "You may clear the commoners," she said snidely. Obediently, Rose, Luc, and the entire congregation began to file toward the back. But Marie Cosette remained motionless. Her heart was pounding. She wasn't sure if it was defiance or fear that kept her in her place, but either way, her feet did not move. Madame de Rouvray stopped in front of her. She rested her hand on the edge of the pew and leaned forward, eyeing her old rival. "Marie Cosette David de la Pailletterie," she said slowly. "It's been a long time. I'm relieved you finally figured out your place." Marie Cosette held her gaze, but said nothing. She knew she should avert her eyes, but she couldn't force herself to do it. Not for her. "You were always too proud for your own good," the marquise whispered. "Even a dog knows when to heel." Marie Cosette felt her hands shaking, but she still did not move. Both women were locked on each other, but there could only be one victor. And it was never going to be Marie Sosette. She knew this, and yet— "Why are you here, Jeanne?" Marie Sosette asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. "New business in the north," she said casually. Her face was getting closer and closer. "And perhaps a little charity. It's clear some poor souls here need saving from this pathetic little gathering." Marie Sosette felt her face flush with rage. "I haven't seen you in years, and somehow you show up here, today. Why?" "For this exact moment," she responded slyly. "Run along, little slave. If I need anything, I'll send for you," she sneered. For a moment, Marie Sosette debated grabbing that self-righteous woman by the hair and tearing her apart right between the pews. Her hands were only a hair away from the marquise's as she dug her nails into the wooden pew. Her whole body was trembling now. She pulled herself tall and opened her mouth to respond. Then, just as she tried to speak, a firm hand grabbed her arm. Father Sabalis whispered urgently, "It will be all right. I promise you. I will finish this wedding. No one will leave until your daughter is wed, before God and all." Marie Sosette did not want to stop, but the priest looked at her sternly. Finally, she nodded stiffly and slowly sank into a shallow curtsy before the marquise. She did not bow out of submission, but merely to keep her dignity intact. Then she turned and walked the gauntlet of the church aisle. The noble women did not yield an inch, forcing Marie Sosette to weave through the pews, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it. As she passed through the church doors and into the sunlight, Rose rushed to her side. "How did that awful woman even get here?" "I don't know," Marie Sosette murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Nui hurried over, glancing at Rose with a reassuring smile. "Rose, honey, go see if you can keep the guests distracted." As Rose moved off, Nui gently guided Marie Sosette out of sight behind the church. Marie Sosette was hyperventilating violently. "Breathe," urged Nui, her voice low and steady. "In and out. Again, slow. In and out." "The wedding is ruined," Marie Sosette choked anxiously. "In and out. We can get through this." "Rose will never be safe, Nui. It's just like with Antoine. A false wedding." Nui tightened her grip. "That's not what's happening here, Marie Sosette. Breathe." "Why is she here? How did she—" Marie Sosette's eyes were losing focus as panic overtook her. "Sometimes old faces appear in new places." Nui's voice was soothing, but Marie Sosette pulled back, her hysteria rising. "Stop touching me, Nui, please," she gasped, struggling to regain control. "I can't. I need a moment alone." Just then, Jeannette popped her head around the aisle. "What's happening, Mama?" "Not now, Jeannette," Marie Sosette snapped. The 12-year-old's face sank. "I'm sorry," she whimpered. Then she ran back around the church, devastated. Nui's tone reversed quickly. "You need to get control of yourself. I'll go handle Jeannette. You're better than this." Marie Sosette sank to her knees in the shadow of the church. Her whole body seized under her as tears streamed down her face. It took her several minutes to regain her composure, but she knew that Nui was right. She had to pull herself together. Taking a final deep breath, Marie Sosette stood up, dusted off her dress, and walked back to the front of the church to rejoin the gathering. She expected to see a sea of frustrated faces, but instead she witnessed joviality. Apparently, her new, almost son-in-law had a knack for entertaining. He had started a game, quietly, of course, challenging the crowd to hypothesize what the wedding crashers needed to confess. It was exactly the relief they all needed. Madame de Rouvray and her entourage took their sweet time in the church, But outside, the celebrations continued in spite of them. Luc made sure that Madame de Rouvray would not ruin their bliss. Marie Cosette was grateful. He really was a good man. He was steady, loving, and cautious, but still, he didn't simply accept fate as Saint-Domingue sowed it. As the sun began to set, Madame de Rouvray emerged from the church full of the haughtiness afforded her new-found holy forgiveness. The guests stared impatiently as her carriage pulled away. Finally, to Marie Cossette's great relief, they were able to re-enter the church to finish the ceremony. Father Sabalis was flawless in his ability to pivot and make light of the situation. With a witty jest about the impatience of sinners, he continued the ceremony, jumping right to the vows. As Marie Cosette watched her daughter proudly swear to honor Luc for the rest of her life, a small smile found its way to her lips. Rose and Luc had weathered so much already. Their union symbolized a strength born from suffering, but one that had endured beyond it. Father Sabalis was true to his promises, and as the marriage certificate was signed before everyone present, Marie Cosette thanked God that the day had, at least, been successful in the end. As the bells rang, they all moved behind the church where a simple but elegant feast had been set up by Luc's family and members of the community. Beneath the shade of towering palm trees, tables adorned with crisp white linens were stretched out in neat rows. Although the food had grown cold during the unexpected delay, it was hardly diminished. There were platters of crispy fried plantains, fragrant bowls of gumbo, and a huge pot of rice awaiting them. Their rich aromas mingled enticingly in the air. As they all settled to eat, Luc clambered on top of a table. "Excited, are we?" Nui teased. "Yes," he called back, beaming. "May I have your attention, everyone? My wife and I have something to say. First, of course, I must thank the ancestors, for it is upon their sacrifices that we have made it here today." He paused, his voice emotional. "Today is a day of celebration and new beginnings. I am filled with gratitude for the love and support we have received from each and every one of you. But there is one person in particular who I want to thank, the woman who made sure I met my incredible wife." It feels so good to say that. The crowd chuckled at his glee. "I lost my parents when I was young. As most of you know, they died from disease when I was only a child. My grandmother, Julia, raised me, and I don't need to tell any of you how wonderful she is." Julia blushed and smiled at her grandson. "But after all these years, I finally have a mother once more. And for those of you who don't know her, well, you only need to look at my wife to see how amazing she is. Marie Cosette, you raised an incredible woman, and none of us would be here today had it not been for you. I have always believed that we are never quits with those who oblige us, and for when we do not owe them money, we owe them gratitude. I don't have much to give you that would even begin to be a worthy comparison to the gift you have given me." He gently kissed Rose's hand. "But I did my best." He pulled out a beautiful leather satchel. The workmanship was incredible. It had the 3 crosses from the Gospel, and etched over the top of it read, "Extolore vita nova." Marie Cosette was stunned. In her entire life, she had only ever received a handful of gifts, and they were mostly rocks that her young children had found pretty. This was the first time someone had ever made something so lovely for her. "Luc, it is beautiful." She traced the inscription with her finger. "Though, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, I can't read what it says." "Oh, don't be embarrassed. I had to ask Father Sabalis how to write it." The priest nodded his head and smiled from a table in the corner. "From suffering, new life," Sabalis called across the tables. "I haven't owned anything this fine in years," she said genuinely. I'm glad you like it, he replied. Everyone was staring at her. Marie-Sosette knew she was supposed to address the crowd. The gathering had grown in size since the wedding began. Food always had that effect in the community. She was not accustomed to being the focus of attention. Her life had largely demanded she remain in the shadows and blend into the background. She stood up with measured grace and cleared her throat. Today did not go exactly as planned, she began cautiously. The crowd chuckled lightly. She looked at Father Sabalis and then to Nui. They were nodding. Nui had her hand resting emotionally over her heart. Marie-Sosette blew out a slow breath, trying to calm her pounding heart. But, despite everything, I could not be more grateful. Being here with all of you, celebrating the marriage of my daughter, Marie-Rose David de la Pailletterie, and Luc Lefebvre, grandson of the distinguished Julia Lefebvre. She glanced at Rose. She looked so happy. Marie-Sosette stood up a little taller. These two are a wonder. As some of you may know, I am a bit of a skeptic towards love, but watching Rose and Luc has reignited a sense of hope in me that I thought I had lost forever. When Luc called to our ancestors, I was reminded of my own father. He always told me how proud we are as a people and how we collectively believe that our love, our connection, transcends all of time. It is hard to find love in a world so full of hate. But somehow, despite all of it, ex dolore nova vita. Marie-Sosette smiled as Nui shot her a proud look. Then Julia stood up and said a few words before Rose finally stood up to speak herself. She held her new husband's hand as she cleared her throat and pulled out a small sheet of paper to read from. Slavery takes a piece of your soul, and you aren't sure you will ever find it again. I was broken and untrusting, but Luc gave space in his heart for me to share my deepest hurts. He healed me and helped me figure out that I have a future, that I can have goals and dreams. He saw me for who I was, not the wounds that had been inflicted upon me. He saw past my pain, even when I could not. She turned to her husband. Thank you, Luc. I love you so much. You are perfect, he said back romantically. He turned back to the crowd. Our marriage was founded on the promise of freedom. But what is freedom without purpose? I know that many people believe that the only purpose for a married woman is to tend the home. But Rose is worth so much more than what this world wishes to limit her to. Marie-Sosette squinted. What was going on? Luc continued. What some of you may not know is that Rose is one of the best read people in Saint-Domingue. Rose blushed. You can thank my mother for that. She always said that the only way to fix problems on this island is through education. Marie-Sosette nodded. So? Luc turned to his wife expectantly. We have leased a barn near the leather shop, and we have received permission to open a school, she said excitedly. Rose is going to be a teacher, Luc burst. Nui jumped out of her seat and began to cheer. A few of the guests looked around awkwardly, but then Manon rose beside her, and soon the entire group was standing, cheering and hugging each other. Luc wrapped his arm around Rose, and she rested her head happily on his shoulder. Marie-Sosette looked around the crowd. There was something different about their union. It was stitched together with purpose and vision. Together they had realized that freedom was not only about the ability to dream on a small level, but to uplift beyond themselves. Rose and Luc had in a single day brought tangible hope to an island that had been drowning in suffering. Perhaps Marie-Sosette could find room in her heart to feel joy again, if only for a day.